right, by show of hands, who's hungover? What? Come on. Only 5 of you in the whole place? Sean, you're hungover? All right, so it looks like I have to pay close attention to you people right here. Before we begin, maybe, I'd like to point out that I am not Bones. I know you're going to sit here for the next 40 minutes and go, who does she look like? I'm not her. I had a guy run up, like literally barrel me over in the Atlanta airport a few months ago and say, can I have your autograph? And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Unless you read Spin Sucks, you don't know who I am. Okay, so I want you guys to dig into your memory. It's going to be hard for some of you. It was a long time ago. It was 1999. Some of you old farts, think back, long time ago, dig back in. We finally got to live Prince's Party like it's 1999. Remember that whole what happens when the new century turns? What's going to happen to the computers? Is the world going to end? Are nuclear plants going to go offline? What's going to happen? There were some really good things that were happening while we were all kind of freaking out about the year 2000. I might be too far away from this. There were 457 companies that IPO'd that year. 457. And of those, 107 of them doubled in stock price the day they went public. That never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. So we had this huge thing going on in Silicon Valley. Young geniuses were getting paid $1 gazillion for big ideas, which was really interesting because venture capitalists weren't looking for business plans. They weren't looking at whether or not companies could actually make a profit. They were looking for eyeballs. Sound familiar, Instagram? You had all of these big, 23, 24, 25-year-olds in multi-million-dollar homes, finally getting to move out of their parents' homes. They had these great big offices with pool tables and foosball tables and PlayStations or Xboxes or whatever young geeks use. Lots and lots of fun. Chefs that were coming in and making meals every day, all day, so that nobody would leave, and they were working night and day trying to make a profit, but they didn't have a business plan, so they didn't really make a profit. Companies such as Dell and WPP were doing things like really interesting things. What they were doing, Dell at that time took 800 agencies, and consolidated it into one. And they used WPP to do that. WPP is a big holding company. So they consolidated it into one because they saw that there was a big benefit to integrating all the marketing disciplines. They saw putting advertising, PR, the web, and direct, and that's all there was at that time, only 12 years ago, putting all of that in under one roof. And then the dot-com bubble burst. Kind of feel like a little bit that's going to happen again here. We're paying a lot of money for eyeballs, but we definitely had the dot-com bubble burst. And then the 9/11 tragedy enveloped our country. And then we had the worst economic downturn that this country has ever seen since the Great Depression. You guys lived this, I don't need to remind you. But what happened was we had this whole idea of integrating disciplines, marketing disciplines under one roof. And the funny thing is that I was at Fleischman Hillard in Kansas City, in a big global firm, and I was lured away to go work for an advertising agency in Chicago to build their PR department. And it was so much fun because we were integrating all of the disciplines under one roof. And advertising was working with PR, and PR was working with direct, and direct was working with web, and all of this stuff was working, and we were all working together, and we were a great team, and we were collaborating. And if advertising had a new business pitch, they would bring in PR. And we were having so much fun. We built a $6 million business for the PR department in 2 years. At that time, I thought, well, shoot, if I can do this for them, I can do it for myself. It's not that easy. But the point is that everybody scurried to their respective corners. So we had this whole idea that we were going to integrate, that we were all going to work together, we were going to collaborate. But what happens when you feel like you're going to lose your job, or that you're reading the newspapers and you're seeing that everybody's around you is losing their jobs, or companies are going out of business, or magazines are folding, or how many newspapers went out of business in 2008? It was a ton. Denver had 3 newspapers and 2 of them went out of business. So we saw all this happening and we said, okay, we're going to hold on to our respective disciplines. Knowledge is power. We don't want to give up our intellectual knowledge. We don't want to give up our institutional knowledge. And if we don't, we're going to keep our jobs. So we began to silo again. And we took away this whole integration piece and working together because we were scared that we were going to lose our jobs. And if you hold on to your budget and you hold on to either on the agency side or on the corporate side, if you hold on to your clients' budgets or internally you hold on to your internal budget, nobody's going to be able to take that away from you. So we all scurried back to our respective corners and integration was lost. No one was working together. I love this. I kind of stole it. You can see the Corbis logo up there, but I thought it was funny. So nobody was working together. So this whole idea of teamwork went away. It's time to do things differently. So we've gone through the worst tragedy our country has ever seen. We've gone through a really bad economy. I'm in Chicago, so we're starting to see things are turning around a little bit, thank heaven. But you're starting to see that things are starting to settle down again, and this new economy is taking over. And in this new economy, it's time to do things differently. It's time to once again work together. That's funny, right? It's time to break down the silos. It's time to put customers, go back. It's time to put customers first. Go ahead, read the cartoon, it's funny. I stole it as well. Customers First campaign. I think that's, nobody's laughing. Laugh. See, more than five of you are hungover, I knew it. And just because I have to have a monkey in every presentation I do, it's time to move our businesses forward. I love monkeys. See, thanks, Jen. So how do we do that? You know, it's fine. We're talking about integration, and we should be working together, and we should be putting customers first. And we're in this whole idea that social media is here, and what's going on, and how do we harness this wild, wild west, and how do we integrate it into our businesses, and how do we measure it? Well, let me introduce to you the marketing round. Hold, please. So the marketing round, I want you to think about, I want you to take away this whole hierarchical, I can never say that and inordinate, see, I can't say those two words. I want you to take away that whole organization that you're used to, where the CEO's at the top, and then you have your executive VPs, and your senior VPs, and your VPs, and your middle management, blah, 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 and then you have this whole hierarchy. I want you to take that away. But right now, I want you only to think about your discipline. Marketing, advertising, PR, communication, search, web, whatever it happens to be. And I want you to think about it as a circle. And you have marketing in the middle. That's going to make some of you mad, because I know as a traditional PR person, if somebody had said, well, marketing owns this, I would have been like, well, that's baloney, why can't I own it? So I want to put everyone's fears to ease. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a marketing person in the middle. It doesn't necessarily have to be your chief marketing officer or your VP of marketing. It needs to be somebody, it might be your community manager, who understands how all of the disciplines work together, okay? So you have your marketing in the middle, and then outside there you have the spokes, and those spokes are the different disciplines. So outside you have PR and corporate communications and advertising and web and search and content and all that going around. And it circles simultaneously, so you're all working together. And the interesting thing then that begins to happen is as the business starts to make critical choices, and it doesn't matter if you're inside a company or at an agency, you can have effect either way. Because what you do is, if you're with an agency, you can go to your clients and say, here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to create a marketing round. Because what happens is this becomes a team. And then that team has their own respective teams to work with. And so you start to work together here, and then they start to bring in HR and sales and legal and customer service and accounting and product development and operations and the executive team. And as you do that, as you bring people in, you start to become integrated. You start to work together. And no longer do you have these silos. Sounds kind of scary, right? Kind of big. How is this going to happen? The very first thing you need to do is break down the silos. And this is really, really, really hard, because what you're asking people to do is change. You have to make a cultural change. And typically, Marketing, PR, advertising, those disciplines aren't the ones that affect corporate change. They're not change management people. Typically, you bring in the consultants from the big companies and they come in and say, these people need to be fired because they're not going to change, and these people may change, but we're going to keep an eye on them, and these people are really good, so we're going to keep them. That's not what I'm recommending here. What you really need to be thinking about is how do you break down those silos, and how do you get people involved, and how do you build that marketing round? One of the best ways to do that is ask supervisors who on your team is really, really passionate about their job, not afraid of risk, has some entrepreneurial spirit. That's the person you're going to put on the marketing round. Ask for volunteers. Who would like to be in the marketing round? You really want these people who are passionate, who have entrepreneurial spirit, who aren't afraid to take risk, and who are willing to hear their friends and their peers say behind their backs, that person's an idiot, I can't believe we're going to be talking about this. We're going to lose our jobs. Because those people that are saying that are the bottom 10% that Jack Welch talks about, and they're the ones that will lose their jobs as you change. But the very important thing here is you have to break down the silos. So there's two kinds of silos, lonely and functional. And you're thinking, I know you're thinking, because when we started doing this work about 10 years ago, we thought, oh, only big corporations have silos. But actually, the lonely silo is really, really prevalent in startups. And what happens is you have a business and you have customers and you have to grow and you have to make payroll and you have to provide benefits and you have to. So because of that, you have one goal, and that goal is to work as hard as you can to get that's squeaky right there, to get the product out and deliver to the customer so that they're happy and that you can sell again. So because of that, you work in these silos that pushes you to do what's best for the customer, but not what's best for the entire company, and you're not working together. And then you have the functional silo. And the functional silo feels like you're working together. It feels very team-oriented. It feels like this is what we should be doing. But in fact, you're having your late-night brainstorms, you're having your pizza parties, you're bringing in food, you're having this great time, and you're collaborating, but you don't have a seat at the business strategy table. This happens a lot in agencies. So in agencies, you'll work on a team for a specific client or an industry, and you'll be really good about working together for that client or that industry, but you don't have a seat at the business strategy table. So we want to figure out what the silo is inside the organization and how we break it down. Is it a lonely silo? And if it is, how do we say, okay, great, absolutely should put the customer first, absolutely should be pushing this forward, absolutely should be delivering on time, but how do we also work with the other people inside the organization? Another place you're going to see those lonely silos start to happen is in virtual organizations. So the companies that work maybe have a headquartered office and then hire people across the country or even around the world to work. You're going to start to see a lot of those silos. So it's our jobs to figure out how we can work to bring people in and create that marketing round. People fear change. How many of you like change? Okay. Do you like change from the perspective of the new iPad or the new iPod just came out, or iPhone just came out? Only one of you? Really? Who's excited that there's a new iPad? Come on. There, thank you. We like change if it means something to us. If it means we're getting a new iPad or we're getting a new iPhone. How many of you like the changes that Facebook makes? Like 10 people, 20 people. I love those changes because I love to watch people complain about them on Facebook. It's great. The new timeline, oh my gosh, I have to have a cover photo. This is ridiculous. I love that. People don't like change. We say we like change, but let's be real. If your routine is screwed up or you have to add something into your business life on top of everything else that you have to do, how many of you actually like to do that? Who uses Pinterest? A few guys. I love Pinterest. I think it's the best thing ever. When you started using Pinterest, what moved out of your business life in order to bring that in? Facebook? Twitter? Productivity. All right, productivity. You don't do anything anymore? The idea here is that we don't like change. And when we like change if it means it's fun and it's interesting and we get to do something. And so we have to make this fun and interesting. People don't change unless there's a crisis. The economic downturn. My agency was very traditional PR. We did events, we did crisis management, we did reputation management, and we did media relations. In 2008, when the bottom fell out, I had to really scramble to figure out how I was going to make payroll. And as a small business owner with 13 people on the payroll, that kind of sucks. So you have to really figure out, that crisis forced a change. And I was on Twitter, but I was on Twitter as BearsFan07, and I only tweeted during the games, during the Bears games. And I couldn't figure out why the heck people were talking to me about the games. Like, I didn't know these people. It was very strange. But in 2008, I sat down and I said, okay, there are two things that need to happen. We have this blog here called Spin Sucks, and I've got this Twitter account, and apparently there's this whole social thing that's happening, and maybe we can figure out a way to incorporate it into our clients' businesses so that they can make money and we can actually track results, and I can make payroll, because making payroll was my #1 concern. People don't change unless there's a crisis. It could be regulatory, so if you're in healthcare or financial services, you may not have the opportunity to use a lot of these tools. And we'll talk about how to do some of that in a second. But it could be the economy, it could be regulatory. There are lots of reasons, competition, there are lots of reasons that you need to change. So you may need to force a crisis. In order to break these silos down and get people to work, you may need to say, look at what our competition's doing over here. Look, doing some brand monitoring and listening. Look at what they're doing over here. We need to do this. And not only do we need to do this, but we need to stay a step ahead of them. We need to take this Apple mentality and figure out how we stay 3 steps ahead. You have to force a crisis in order to create the change. And then, once you've created this marketing round, so here you're breaking down the silos, you're working toward change management, you may create a crisis, you've asked for volunteers or you've asked for specific people to work in the marketing round, you need to make it part of their bonus program. If you're inside a company, this is a little bit easier than if you're outside, but if you're outside and you're consulting or working with a company, say to the executives, if you're really serious about this, the people on the marketing round team need to be incentivized to do this. Because guess what happens? When we're incentivized, we tend to do it. So if you can make it part of the bonus program or create some sort of incentive program for people to participate and break down the silos and work really well together, that's going to be your best chance. Then you've done all those things, and it's time to think about your approaches. So as Jeff Livingston and I were writing the book, we really discovered through both of our client experience that there are 4 approaches. So obviously the bullseye, the very best thing that we want to be thinking about is how do we go direct to customer, right? That's the best thing. That's like the gold at the end of the rainbow. Agree? This is audience participation? Yeah? 600 people here and I can't get a yes. Thank you, Jen. Amen. Amen, that works too. Direct, so we're talking events, email, even direct mail, which I don't highly recommend, but it still works for some, and social media. So how do we go direct to the customer? But that's not the only thing that we do. We also have a top-down approach, and the top-down approach is traditional PR. So you have corporate communications, you have influencer relations, you have media relations in your top-down approach. In your groundswell, we all know that as word-of-mouth marketing, social media, brand ambassadors, communities. So you're creating that groundswell, you're creating the top-down approach so that you have an ability to go direct as yourself, the company, and then as influencers and brand ambassadors are talking to the customers as well. But we also discovered, as we were interviewing companies and talking about things, that it wasn't just those 3 approaches. It wasn't just social and content and traditional PR and advertising and going direct to customers. There also were flanking techniques. And the flanking techniques come into play when you don't have a loyal customer base, your industry is dying, your business is almost out of business. And so you have to figure out a way to sort of flank the whole idea that you can work direct with customers. And the very best example of this is Chrysler. So here the automakers are getting bailed out by the government. The auto companies are trying to figure out how they're going to repair their image. Detroit is nearly defunct. I mean, people are saying the city's not going to exist anymore. And Chrysler looks at this and they say, instead of trying to repair our image like our competition is doing, we don't have a loyal customer base, our industry is dying, our city is dying, the government's having to bail our industry out so that we can keep producing for this country. What do we do about this? So 2 years ago, not this past Super Bowl, but the Super Bowl before, they decided to say, you know what, we're not going to try to repair our image. The country already thinks that the industry is dying. The country already thinks that the city's going to die. The country doesn't know where they're going to get their next car from. So we're going to kind of put that aside. And we're going to say, we are the fire in adversity. And here is the Chrysler 200. And they did it by saying, this is Motor City and this is what we do. We are the fire inside the adversity. They didn't say, oh, well, we're trying to rebuild and we've got this bailout and we're trying to do all these things that their competition did. They said, no, we're going to put that aside. We're not going to try to repair the image. We're going to create a loyal base with this flanking technique called advertising, and we're going to go forward and we're going to say, this is what it is. And then, of course, they continued that this year in the Super Bowl with Clint Eastwood, right? Yes. Yes. So because of that, they had no loyal customer base. They had no reason to do the direct or the top-down or the groundswell. They had to find a flanking technique to work. And so they did that to really create that loyal customer base. And as of, when we sent the book in January, so as of January, their sales were almost double that they were in 2007. And 2007 was a big year for them. So this flanking technique worked really, really well. Now it's time to map your resources. So it's interesting because in this room I know that we have people from big corporations, we have people from big agencies, we have sole proprietors. One of the things that you're going to think about is whatever we talk about here or whatever we talk about in the book is not going to be the same for any one of you. And when you're trying to figure out what the marketing round is, who's on the marketing round, what's included, what approaches you take, you've got to figure out, you've got to sort of start at benchmark 0. Here's our platform. What do we have to think about? I want you to think about who we have on the team. The marketing round may only be 1 or 2 people, or it might be 30 people. Who's on the team? What strengths do they have? And where are we weak? So as we think about these approaches, who on the team on the marketing round has experience or expertise in one of these areas or 2 of these areas? We're going to map to the resources we have. So it really doesn't matter if you are a sole proprietor or you're 5,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 or a gazillion employees. Map to your resources. What kinds of things do you have strengths and where can you build some business? And then you're going to measure your results. And one of my favorite things is the ROI of your mom. Not to pick on Gary Vee, but the ROI of your mom is bullshit. You absolutely positively can measure your results. And this whole idea that media impressions and advertising equivalency and brand awareness and blah, blah, blah can't be measured. What's the old adage that we can spend $100 and $50 of it works, we just don't know which $50? Baloney. That's the old days. We really want to think about how to measure our results to the business goals. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you're in a nonprofit, maybe it's grants that you're getting, or maybe it's fundraising. If you're in a for-profit business, how are we driving revenue? How are we shortening the sales cycle? How are we helping generate leads? These are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about. And because a lot of the work that we're doing is on the web, we can measure it. We can track it. We know exactly where people are coming from, who's there, what they're doing, how long they're staying, and you start to use your offline and your online to integrate to see what happens. I know exactly what happens. If I speak, I do a lot of speaking to CEO organizations, and I will watch. This is how scientific it is. I'll speak and I'll watch them. Somebody from that audience will go to the blog, they'll subscribe, they'll read, then they go and check out our Facebook page, they might follow me on Twitter, and then the phone rings. We know exactly where people are coming from and what they're doing. We know whether or not we're getting business from speaking engagements, from the blog, from social networks, from our email marketing. We know exactly. You have to measure your results to the business goals. I like to show this example because last year, Marcus Sheridan said, you need to start writing content that has the word versus in it, because that helps with your long tail searches. So I said, okay, I'm going to take his advice. I'll write a blog post called PR versus Marketing. And I wrote it on August 7th maybe. And I just pulled this so you can see. On that day we had, between the 2 days, we had about almost 4,500 page views. But the interesting thing in there is I added a link to Marcus had just done a webinar for us. So I added a link in there to his webinar, talking about PR versus marketing and the difference, pros and cons of both, and why you should hire PR versus marketing or not. But there was that pretty little blue hyperlink in there, and I wanted to see how many people actually clicked on that. Because we sell that, it's $50, okay? So it gives us, this is a really basic, easy way to figure out how to measure results. It gives us an opportunity to figure out what people are doing. So again, we have 43, almost 4,400 page views, and with my in-page analytics from Google, which is free, by the way, it shows me that 2% of those people clicked on it, which is 47 people. 47 people clicked on that link. I compare that to my e-commerce, and 43 people bought the webinar that day. Okay, 43 people at $50, that's all right, right? For a blog post, pretty good ROI. That's what we're talking about here, is how do you use your marketing round to figure out what it is that you're measuring? And how do you track those results? Because everything's online. Even if you have a print ad, you can push people back to a specific URL. If you have a news release, push people back to a specific URL. QR codes, push people back to a landing page. There's so many things you can be measuring and tracking that there's no reason on earth that we should have what's the ROI of your mom. And then it's time to kick some butt. It kind of looks like it hurts, huh? So I want you to think about this. It's not easy by any means. Break down the silos. So you have the lonely silo, you have the functional silo. What silo exists inside your organization? What silo exists inside your clients' organizations? How are you going to break those down? What are you going to do to help them create change, create a crisis, figure out how to work together? Then you're going to build your marketing round. So remember, you have a marketing person who understands how all of the disciplines work together. That could be your community manager, it could be a chief marketing officer, it could be a PR pro, whatever it happens to be, that person needs to know how all of the disciplines work together. Then you're going to break down your silos. Oh, no, sorry. You did that already. You're going to choose your approaches. And your approaches, remember, you have direct in the middle, which is the mecca. That's what you want. Your top-down approaches, your traditional PR kinds of things, your groundswell, social media, what we're all accustomed to, and your flanking techniques. And remember, the flanking techniques are usually used in times where you don't have a loyal customer base or you need to affect change really quickly and can't do that because you don't have brand ambassadors because nobody cares about your business. So that's when you use those flanking techniques. Then you map to your resources. Map to the resources you have. So again, if you only have 3 people or you have 50 people, who on that marketing round has the resources that you need to be effective? You are not going to be able to use direct, groundswell, flanking, top-down, all of these at once if you have a small team, if you don't have the resources. But you can be extremely effective if you figure out where your strengths are, where those strengths lie, and what those people can contribute. And then measure your results. And if you need help measuring your results, there's plenty of stuff written on the web about it. I have not read Olivier Blanchard's book yet, but I hear it's really, really good in terms of how to measure results. Figure out what the return on investment is. And again, it might be grant writing, it might be fundraising, it might be revenue, it might be shortening the sales cycle. One of the things that you want to think about, and this is one of the things we learned with clients, is people talk about bottom line results, but the problem is you could generate all this revenue and the company could spend a bunch of money and then there's no profit left, which you're not really responsible for. So you really want to look at how are you creating leads and opportunities for more revenue. I just wrote a blog post yesterday about the 10 ways to convert your landing pages. And the number 10 thing is actually use the leads, because how many of you generate leads and you hand them off to your sales team and the sales team does nothing with them? Does that happen? Happens to us all the time. Because what happens is they go, oh, I was just at this trade show and I came back with all these cards and I got to follow up with them because I actually had conversations with them and thank you for these leads, but I'm not going to follow up. What? That's why it's so important to break down the silos, create an opportunity to work together, collaborate, and figure out a way to do it. And with that, I leave you Marketing in the Round, co-authored by Jeff Livingston, who really wrote all the smart parts, and I just added the color. That's it.
All right, thanks, Jenny. We've got time for questions. Someone's got to have a question right here.
Guinea pig, thank you.
Hi. Marcus may want to speak to this later, but you mentioned that Versus helps you in blog posts. What's the story there?
So it's really interesting because, and Marcus may want to talk to this later. Will you talk to this later? Okay, awesome. I'm going to put words in his mouth, so then he just has to repeat what I said. Perfect. People search for those kinds of things. So one of the things that we actually work with our clients on is we say to the sales guys, okay, what kinds of things do you get in meetings, in new business meetings, sales meetings? And it's always the kinds of things that people are searching for. So PR versus advertising, PR versus marketing. Marcus does, one of my favorite examples to use is in-ground pools versus above-ground pools. So it's the kinds of things that people search for online, because that helps with the search results on your long tail. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
I'm going to start calling on people if you don't. And I know who's hungover, so I'll ask you first.
There's been a, where you go? I'll get you next. Is there anyone else with a mic? No. All right. I'll just run around.
There's a mic up here. Do you want to?
Yeah, there we go.
How would you use technology to effectively follow up with leads?
Great question. There's a lot of things marketing from an automation standpoint that you can do. HubSpot is one of my favorites. We use it for almost all of our clients. It's really effective because it allows you to incorporate your CRM, and it pretty much does it all for you. So if you're just starting out and don't have the resources to do it yourself, HubSpot's a great tool. But there are plenty of companies that'll help you integrate your CRM and your analytics and all your databases and all the SAP and all those acronyms. But if you're just starting out, I really recommend HubSpot. It's a great tool that allows you to get started really quickly.
Oh, right here, perfect.
Silos are very difficult to break down. In fact, I was part of a group very much like you described, where they took people who were out of each department who were interested in working on a hot new project, and the corporation managed to get all of us to leave within 9 months. How have you uncovered any real techniques to help companies work through those issues?
Yeah, and it's a great question because you're right. You're affecting change, and you're doing something. Remember, people don't like change, so you're doing something that's very uncomfortable for people. So you're going to have this big backlash, which I'm sure you experienced. It has to come from the executive team, and it has to be the CEO has to say, we are doing this. We're staying on course. This is the vision. This is why we're doing it. And sometimes you have to remind the CEO to repeat that. It's time to send an email or write a blog post or write a memo or whatever it is, but you have to stay on the CEO to push him or her to do that, because if they're not bought in and they're not the ones communicating it, you will end up leaving in 9 months.
Yeah, any tips on incentivizing your marketing round?
Yeah, it's funny because bonus programs work the best, but not everybody's motivated by money. Who's motivated by money? I'm not gonna lie, I like shoes. I'm motivated by money. But there are things that work, just as well. If you get to know the people, and this is actually a good business tip. If you get to know the people inside your organization, what do they like? Like I have one employee who loves all the new trendy hair tools. So when she does something really well, instead of giving her a bonus, because she would never buy a new flat iron with her bonus, we buy her a $200 flat iron. So if you really figure out what people want and what they're motivated by, it works really, really well. Of course, you know, money works always, but there's always those little pieces that you can insert, gift cards, things like that, that help keep them going, especially when their peers are saying, this is baloney, I can't believe you're doing this.
Any more quote? We got Alex Lavage on Twitter. Wanted to know, and it'd be great if you have any examples, if anyone's using any type of automated system, specifically around tweets that you've seen to respond to brand inquiries. What role does kind of an automated system play in that?
I'm not a fan of automating tweets. I know it's hard, and I know it's a lot, but if Dell can do it with 22,000 tweets per day, the rest of us can do it. I mean, they get 22,000 customer complaints a day. They don't automate it. The rest of us can do it.
Ginny, you talked about sales rejecting leads frequently or not acting on them. What advice would you give to engage a sales team more effectively?
That? No, you really do, and that's part of breaking down the silos and working together. And if you have some salespeople that aren't going to work with you because you have the buy-in from the executive team, that's a business operations decision. That's do we keep this person on or do we not? And if you're breaking down the silos and creating that change and really working together, it's going to work. But there are always that one or two, and they're usually old codgers that are like, oh, the young kids are coming in and changing things. You really have to decide from an operations standpoint, is that the best, are they the best people to keep in line? And if they're not, that, again, it goes back to having your executives involved. And it's always hard to fire the top producers because they're top producers. But if they're not going to work and you're really serious about doing this, sometimes that's what has to happen. Not that I'm advocating people getting fired.
All right, give it up for Emily Deschanel. Thanks.